joy doesn't have to come from something new. It may already exist in what is. And that is why we do this work.
Hey, Bliss'ner. Before we start today's episode, I am doing something a little unconventional. I am popping in here in real time to let you know about my brand new 6-month coaching container called Bliss'n Up Hub. This is a live-led coaching circle for humans unlocking bliss. If you want to know more about this, go to my show notes and there'll be information on how to connect with me and sign up for this program. It's kicking off on August 4th, which is why I'm jumping in here. If you are on Apple or Spotify and you don't see my video, then you're just hearing my voice. But if you go to YouTube, you'll see me. I'm in a straw hat and my bathing suit because I'm on my way to the beach, but I couldn't miss the opportunity to invite you into this circle. This circle is going to be about doing life in a brand new, exciting, rhythmic, ritualistic, magical, synchronistic way. And I want to do it with you. Okay, so remember to go to the show notes. And if you have any questions about this program, I am happy to answer any questions you may have. This is going to be pretty awesome, and I don't want you to miss out on it. Bye.
Hey, Bliss'ner. Welcome to episode number 64 of Bliss'n Up. So last week, I talked about the art of remembering your future, remembering your past. It was a great episode, but I got to tell you, that episode led me down a rabbit hole. It really sparked something in me, a noticing that I didn't expect. And it made me realize that oftentimes joy can sneak up on you, like even when you're not trying, just because you are doing this work, because you are in the work of noticing, of remembering, of connecting the dots, of being intentional about your life. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about today. And I want to start with this premise, which is, do you ever feel like you're so deep in the work of building a life that you forget to notice when you've actually arrived at that version of your life and of yourself that you once dreamed of? I find that happens all the time, and it's happened to me. And it really happened to me this week. And when I caught it, it was just, it's been so impactful. It's been so much joy for me, like such a spark of bliss. So I have to share this story with you. Last week, I was in a conversation with one of my clients, and she asked me about a book that was written in the 1980s. It was a very, very popular book. It was called Anuario de Familias Cubanas, and it was written by a man named Joaquin de Posada. So she wanted to know if that person had any relationship to me because my last name is de Posada. And in fact, that the author of that book is my grandfather. Now, I was very, very close to my grandfather. I grew up, he was one of my primary caretakers, him and my grandmother. Since my parents were divorced, my father was traveling all over the world and my mother worked. They were an integral part of raising me. You know, they took care of me every single day after school, all day in the summers, all up until I was about 12 years old when my grandfather passed away. So they were very involved in my life, and I was very, very close to my grandfather. So when this client of mine asked me about this book, it brought me a lot of joy because it's not the first time that somebody asks me about that book. It's a very popular book. I'll actually show it to you. It's right here. Hold on. Look. This is the book. Yay. This is the Anuario de Familias Cubanas, which my grandfather wrote. So anyway, people have asked me about that book a million times. It's a very famous book in Cuban culture. If you were in Miami or, in the time between the 60s and the 1980s, in that 20-year period, you know about this book, you know about my grandfather. Like it was a thing. So it was great to talk about it. But anyway, she sparked that memory in my heart about my grandfather. And even though people have asked me about him a million times, and I've talked about his book a million times, this time was very different. This conversation was very different because it prompted me to do something that I had never done, which was remember him publicly. I often talk about my father. I talk about the work that my father did. I talk about my parents all the time, right? My mom and my dad. I use their stories and their history and how they've impacted my life in different ways. So if you've been around for a long time, you may have heard that. And specifically as it relates to my father, I often talk about how my father was a motivational speaker. He was an author, a consultant, and I loved the work that he did. And even though I love that work, I never really did that work because I had this vision of my father who was like traveling all over the world and divorced from my mom and had like a nomadic lifestyle. And in my head, I always thought that I couldn't really have that lifestyle. Like that, I wanted to be a wife, I wanted to be a mom. That lifestyle really wasn't for me. So I stayed away from that business model for a long time, and then he passed away. And when he passed away, even though I was a lawyer at the time, I decided to change careers and follow in his footsteps and carry his legacy because the work was that important to me. But for years, I struggled. For years, I struggled because I didn't want to have his lifestyle, but I wanted to follow in his footsteps. And I didn't know how to merge these two lives. I didn't know how to be me and be him, like at the same time. So this is one of the things that I have spent the last 10 years, literally 10 years, building and forming and trying to figure out like where my place was in this world and how was I going to create a life that maintained the lifestyle of wife and mother that I longed for, but allowed me to do the work that my father did. And I started to figure it out. Over the years, I have figured it out. In fact, now I have a full-blown business that I absolutely love and adore. And I've done it on my own terms. It's very different than what my father did, but I am a life coach. I do speak. I write. I have this podcast. I work with incredible people, women, men, groups. I've just been able to do all these amazing things, very aligned with the work that my father did, but just so different. It was always so different. So that's just to give you a little bit of context. I digress from what I was talking about with my grandfather, but it was just to give you a little bit of context so that you could understand the history behind this. But I had never spoken about my grandfather or his life or anything like that, even though I have this book and I love the book and I knew that he was an author also, but I never really talked about him until this client of mine brought him to my attention. And I don't know if it was because I had been talking about remembering and I was just in that energy. I think it is because of that. I was just kind of like in that energy where I was remembering and I was noticing and I was inspired to do a video on Instagram about my grandfather. And in that video, I mentioned, because I've always said this, like this is not new, but I've always said this. I mentioned that I believe my grandfather was like the pioneer of Facebook. He created Facebook in print for Cubans long before technology existed and long before Facebook was invented. This is a book that grabbed everybody's information from Cubans all over the country that were dispersed after the exile and connected them. In this book, my grandfather dedicated his life to finding these people and then identifying who they were, name, last name, address, phone number, who their kids are, who are they married to, what is their occupation. Like he would just grab this information from these people and he would list it in this directory of this book so that people could communicate with each other, so they could find each other here in the United States. So this was like Facebook, okay? And I always talk about this, but as I'm sharing this on Instagram for the first time ever publicly, all of a sudden I say something and it just clicked. I said, "Oh, my grandfather was an entrepreneur long before entrepreneurship existed." That's when I saw it. I saw it. My brain scanned into my past life and I saw myself as this little girl in my grandfather's office. Now, my grandfather had an office in his garage, in his house. He had his desk, and then he had his green typewriter with his yellow paper that had like a carbon filter in the back. This is how old this was. And he would sit at his desk in front of his typewriter and he would type all day long. And that was his entire life. Now, in that garage, he set up a little desk for me on the opposite corner. And on that desk, he would buy me puzzles. He was the person who introduced me to puzzles. So I would do puzzles on the desk. He would buy me these black and white composition notebooks, and he would have me write in these composition notebooks. So I would write words and paragraphs. He would help me perfect my Spanish writing, things like that. And he just gave me a space to be with him while he was working, because he loved to work, but he was also such a present grandfather and he wanted me to be there with him. And something about saying he was an entrepreneur before entrepreneurship existed helped me see that the lifestyle that my grandfather had is incredibly similar to the one I have designed for myself in present day. I literally have a little office similar to my grandfather's in my home, just like my grandfather. I sit at my desk behind my computer, just like my grandfather did with his typewriter. And I live my work. I live and breathe my work, just like my grandfather did.
Hey, listener, I'm taking a quick pause because I have to let you know that I have just opened the doors to the Bliss'n Up Hub. This is a 6-month coaching circle where we are taking a deep dive into the frameworks that I've been teaching for the last 6 years with my one-on-one clients, with different groups, and on this podcast. And I am putting it all in one place for you to integrate into your life. We are going to have weekly coaching, seasonal challenges, and a sacred community to put these principles into practice and integrate in real time. I am so excited. We are kicking off this group on August 4th. The link is in the show notes. And now back to the episode.
My father was spontaneous and adventurous, and no day looked the same. He was always all over the place. I never knew when he was in town or not in town, but for his phone calls, right? He'd call me and he'd be like, "I'm flying in, I'm flying out." One day he was playing tennis in Puerto Rico. The other day he was playing tennis in Miami. I just never really knew. Well, or I knew because we kept in touch so frequently, but I mean, he was spontaneous. He was all over the place. He had like this nomadic lifestyle. But my grandfather was methodical. He was very intentional. He was very repetitive. He was also very present. He was also a lifelong husband, father, grandfather, a family man, a man that was devoted and dedicated to his family. I didn't realize it until this moment. I didn't realize that the entire time that I have been struggling on how to bridge the gap between the work that my father did and the life that I wanted to have, lived in a blueprint that I had already experienced. I had just forgotten. I literally had forgotten that this blueprint was designed for me already. And what's fascinating is because I was living a life of alignment, because I have been taking aligned action in my life all of these years, it led me to that blueprint. I just didn't notice. I didn't get the memo until I created that video on Instagram. And this has moved my soul. This is legacy. I have found a way to combine the two men that I admire the most in my life and do both of their work, carry both of their legacies in a sacred way. Now, a little part of me wonders, like, man, had I noticed this earlier, would I have struggled as much? Maybe I could have bridged that gap sooner. But the truth is, I don't believe that to be true. I believe that we have our own path. And part of this experience of life is uncovering these things. It's the game of feeling like you're navigating in the dark and then realizing that there was light all along. It's the game of uncovering your power that has been there all along. It's the idea that you don't have a blueprint, that you think you have to create it, and it was there all along. I think there's something beautiful to that. But the journey is important. You've got to struggle. You've got to do the work. You've got to pay attention. You get to remember in hindsight. It's okay if you don't see it right now. You may see it when you're good and ready. And that is a beautiful thing. I think I realized it exactly when I was supposed to. In fact, I may even say that maybe had I seen it earlier, I wouldn't have been able to recognize it. They say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So maybe I just wasn't ready to see it back then. But the story also reminded me of something important, which is that joy doesn't have to come from something new. It may already exist in what is. And that is why we do this work. Sometimes we don't actually need to do more or find more. We get to recognize what is already good, what is already there. At the beginning of this, I talked about how sometimes you're so busy doing the work that of building a life that you don't recognize the life you've already built. Now, this for me was incredible because I have been over the last 10 years building this life, and it was like I just popped my head up today and noticed that I had designed the life that I wanted all along. And in very many ways, it was my grandfather's life. But this can happen in other areas too. Like, for example, in identity work. Now, sometimes you want to create an identity, like you want to create the identity of a healthy person, or you want to create the identity of an athlete, or you want to create the identity of a business person, a CEO, or of a wealthy person, or of a spiritual person. And you put your head down and you start to do the work to become that thing, right? By changing your thoughts, changing your actions, changing your habits, and you hit roadblocks along the way. And sometimes you're defaulted to old versions of yourself that weren't that faithful, versions of yourself that weren't that healthy, versions of yourself that doesn't have confidence in your business skills, right? You can default back, but then you get back on and you keep building and you keep building. But then one day, you pop up your head and you realize, I have become the person that I've been working toward all these years. This is the dream. I am living the dream of the version of myself that I wanted. This happened to me recently with somebody that I'm very close to. He struggled for many years. He struggled for many years with his life, a family member of mine. And I talked to him this morning, and he was mowing the lawn at home. And he said to me, I love my life. I love to mow the lawn. I love where I live. I love my wife. I love my lifestyle. I love what I do for a living. I love how I make money. It's like, oh my God, I love my life. And it was prompted because I invited him to remember. I invited him to remember. So today, I want to invite you to remember what is already in your life that you once dreamed of. What version of your old self would be amazed by your life today? Write that down. Take a little time on this sacred Sunday and reflect on that. Reflect on that version of yourself. Give yourself the joy of connecting the dots, of success filing, of looking at your life and how far you've come. In my case, I loved my grandfather so much. He was such an important part of my life. And thinking about him this week has brought me immeasurable bliss. I have this gratitude for the influence he had on me, for the time he spent with me, for how he molded me. I didn't realize just how much so until now. I mean, I always knew because of the puzzles thing that he was super impacting in my life, but I didn't realize to the depth that it was until now. And it made me very proud of my legacy, of my history. And as you look into your past and into your history, I want you to notice, look for the good. Look for the innovators, for the trailblazers, for the brave ones, for the examples, for the role models, for those who paved the path for you to be here, for those who left blueprints for you, maybe consciously or unconsciously. That is part of the work, and it's absolutely beautiful. And it doesn't have to be your direct lineage, right? It doesn't have to be like your parents or maybe even your grandparents. What if it's deep down the lineage? I have a friend of mine, her name is Crystal Washington. She's from my group, the National Speakers Association. And she took an interest in her history and her lineage. And I remember last year, she showed me a picture of a woman that was, I can't remember how far removed she was from her lineage, but it was like an great, 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 great grandmother or aunt, something of that nature. And she was a trailblazer. She was doing super brave work at a time when women did not step into those roles. And because Crystal has started to study her lineage, her ancestry, trying to find where she came from, she discovered this woman, and the history of this woman, like her story, became one of her role models. And she realized that a lot of the work that she's doing today is built on the path that this woman paved for her so many centuries ago. And now she admires her and she looks to her as one of her heroes and one of her mentors in this life. That's how I feel about my grandfather, but I was too busy trying to figure things out on my own to pay attention and to look back and to remember how influential he was in my life. So that's what I've got for you today. I hope this story has brought you a little bit of joy. I hope it's made you think. I hope it inspires you to go back into your lineage, into your history. And I also hope that it makes you reflect on what you have been trying to build. What have you been trying to design? And think about how far you've come. You know, in the story Hamilton, it says, look at where we are. Look at where we started. I invite you to look at where you started and where you are today. And hopefully you'll be so proud of where you are. But if you're not, I want you to look at today and decide to build tomorrow to be the life you want to be, to become the identity you want to become. Do it for tomorrow. Start today. It is not too late. And use your history, your path, your lineage, your mentors. Use all of the blueprints you can to remember that you don't have to do it alone. I hope you have a beautiful Sacred Sunday, and I will see you next week. That's it for today's episode. Thanks so much for being here. I am deeply, deeply grateful for this time to connect. If you're loving this podcast, I'd love if you could support me by subscribing, rating, and or leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Those reviews help us so much. And if you know of someone who could really use a voice like mine in their head, please share this with them and let them know how much you care about their bliss. Now, if you are feeling called to dig deeper and really work on elevating your mindset, wellness, and your relationships to create a healthier, happier, and more meaningful life, then I invite you to schedule a 60-minute complimentary consultation with me. Let's have a meaningful conversation and see if working together is in our future. You can find the link to the calendar of consults right there in my show notes, but you can also connect with me on my website, carolinedeposada.com, or just send me a DM on Instagram at carolinedeposada. Like my friend always says, the project is big and you're a part of it. So thanks for being here.